Hey everyone, let me tell you a story about David. David had always wanted to speak English fluently. He wasn't a complete beginner, but every time he tried to have a real conversation, he'd freeze up. He could understand English when watching movies or YouTube videos, but when it came to speaking, it felt like a completely different language. Sound familiar? David decided to take things into his own hands. He started following a plan that completely changed the way he learned English. Here's what he did. Step 1. Surround yourself with English. David's first step was to immerse himself in English. He knew he didn't need to move to an English-speaking country to do this. Instead, he made English part of his daily life. Here's how. Listening to English every day. David began watching English movies and TV shows. He didn't just watch them for fun. He paid attention to the words and phrases people used. Whenever he heard a word he didn't know, he wrote it down and looked it up later. Changing his phone's language to English. A simple but effective move. Every time David picked up his phone, he saw and thought in English. Following English-speaking accounts. David followed influencers and content creators on social media who posted in English. This way, every time he scrolled through his feed, he was exposed to the language. Step 2. Speak out loud. Once David was surrounded by English, he knew he had to start speaking it out loud. Speaking is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Here's what he did. Talking to himself. At first, David felt a bit silly talking to himself, but he quickly realized how helpful it was. He described what he was doing, thinking, or seeing. For example, while cooking, he'd say, "I'm chopping onions." It helped him form sentences without any pressure. Recording himself. David chose topics he liked, talked about them for a few minutes, and recorded himself. Listening to his recordings helped him identify areas to improve. It felt awkward at first, but he noticed his progress over time. Finding a speaking partner. David reached out to a friend who was also learning English. They practiced speaking together, which gave David confidence and helped him get used to real conversations. Step 3. Learn common phrases. One of David's biggest challenges was not knowing what to say in conversations. But he learned that he didn't need to know every word in the English language. Instead, he focused on learning common phrases and expressions. Learning phrases, not just words. For example, instead of just learning the word busy, he learned the phrase, "I'm busy right now." This way, he knew how to use the word in a sentence. Mixing English into his native language. When chatting with friends in his native language, David started throwing in English phrases like, "by the way," or "in my opinion." This helped him practice switching between languages. Practicing real conversations. While watching English movies, David mimicked the way native speakers used phrases. He repeated them out loud until they felt natural. Step 4. Work on pronunciation. David realized that fluency wasn't just about words, it was also about being understood. So, he focused on improving his pronunciation. Listening and repeating. He listened to native speakers in videos and songs, pausing to repeat after them. He paid attention to how they pronounced words. Practicing tricky sounds. English sounds like the th in think and the r in run were tough for David at first. but he practiced them repeatedly until he felt comfortable. Using apps and tools. David found apps that analyzed his pronunciation and gave feedback. They became a key part of his practice routine. Step 5. Embrace mistakes. One of David's biggest breakthroughs came when he stopped being afraid of making mistakes. He realized that mistakes are part of learning. Embracing his mistakes. Instead of feeling embarrassed, David saw his mistakes as opportunities to learn. Each mistake brought him closer to fluency. Asking for feedback. When practicing with his friend or a teacher, he'd ask them to point out areas where he could improve. Being patient with himself. David knew that learning a language takes time. He celebrated every small victory and kept moving forward. Step 6. Build confidence. Fluency isn't just about words or pronunciation. It's also about confidence. David worked on building his self-belief so he could speak more naturally. Setting small goals. David started small, setting goals like speaking English for 5 minutes a day. As he met these goals, his confidence grew. Celebrating successes. Each time he achieved a goal, David took a moment to celebrate. Recognizing his progress kept him motivated. Visualizing success. David spent a few minutes each day imagining himself speaking English fluently. He pictured himself enjoying conversations and expressing his ideas clearly. Step 7. Stay consistent. David's final and most important step was to stay consistent. He knew that fluency wouldn't happen overnight, so he made English practice a daily habit. Creating a routine. David set aside time each day to practice, whether it was in the morning, during lunch, or before bed. Joining a community. David joined an online group of English learners. Talking to others on the same journey kept him motivated. Staying positive. On tough days, David reminded himself why he started learning English. He focused on his goals and kept pushing forward. Questions and answers. Who is the main character in the story? David, a person who wants to speak English fluently. What was David's main problem with learning English? He could understand English in movies or videos, but he froze up during real conversations. What was the first step David took to improve his English? He immersed himself in English by surrounding himself with the language daily. How did David listen to English every day? He watched English movies and TV shows, paid attention to the words and phrases, and wrote down unfamiliar words to look up later. What simple change did David make on his phone? He changed his phone's language to English so he could think and see English every time he used it. How did social media help David learn English? He followed English-speaking influencers and content creators to expose himself to English on his feed. What technique did David use to practice speaking English by himself? He talked to himself in English, describing what he was doing, thinking, or seeing. What did David do to evaluate his speaking skills? He recorded himself speaking on various topics, listened to the recordings, and identified areas for improvement. How did David practice real conversations? He found a speaking partner, like a friend also learning English, and practiced conversations with them. What type of vocabulary did David focus on learning? He focused on learning common phrases and expressions instead of individual words. Why did David mix English phrases into his native language? It helped him get comfortable switching between languages and practicing commonly used expressions. How did David improve his pronunciation? He listened to native speakers, practiced tricky sounds, and used apps to analyze and refine his pronunciation. Which specific English sounds did David find challenging? He struggled with sounds like th in think and r in run. What was David's attitude towards making mistakes? He embraced mistakes as opportunities to learn and improve. How did David receive feedback on his English skills? He asked friends or teachers to give him feedback and advice on areas to improve. What small goals did David set to build his confidence? He started with small, achievable goals like speaking English for 5 minutes a day. Why did David celebrate his successes? Celebrating small achievements motivated him and built his confidence. What visualization technique did David use? He imagined himself speaking English fluently, enjoying conversations, and expressing ideas clearly. How did David maintain consistency in his practice? He created a daily routine for practicing English, joining communities, and staying motivated. What communities did David join to stay motivated? He joined online groups and forums of English learners to connect and practice with others. What advice did David follow on tough days? He reminded himself why he started learning English and focused on his long-term goals. What is fluency about, according to the story? Fluency is about communicating ideas clearly and confidently, not about being perfect. What message does David's story convey to learners? Anyone can achieve fluency with practice, patience, and consistency. Thank you so much for joining me today and listening to David's story. I hope it inspired you and gave you some practical steps to start or continue your English learning journey. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends who are also learning English. Let's keep growing and learning together. If you have any questions or want to share your own English learning tips, drop them in the comments below. I love hearing from you. And remember, every small step you take gets you closer to fluency. Keep practicing, stay positive, and never give up. See you in the next video. Bye for now.